What is your tabletop game of choice? Now, that game, what genre is it? Not like combat, not like investigation. What genre, if you were to compare it to a movie or form of book, is it fantasy? Because chances are, it's probably fantasy. Yes, we have fantasy books, we have fantasy movies, we have fantasy games, and we especially have fantasy tabletop games. Fantasy games like D&D, which of course is the most popular tabletop role-playing game, and more games come out by lesser companies which start to push at the heels of D&D, like Pathfinder and Daggerheart, and wonder, another fantasy game? Yes, another fantasy game. And I have to ask, why so much fantasy? Why is fantasy the game to make? Why is fantasy the game that you look everywhere and someone's made a fantasy game in some degree? We have Daggerheart, we have Old School Essentials, which is basically like D&D now that I think about it. We have Mouse Ritter, we have Morkborg, which are all manners of fantasy, even if they're explored in a different way, but they are fantasy. There's magic, there's swords, there is spells, and there's sort of noble, medieval, feudal Japan-esque notes of fantasy, old period stuff mixed with magic and dragons. So, why is there so much of it though? Is it just a great business strategy? Yes. Why is it also like the genre of choice beyond just money, the thing that people go to? Well, after thinking about it for a long time, I think it's got a lot more to do than just because it's like D&D. For example, when it comes to fantasy, what is the thing that you get drawn to the most? Is it the fact that it's all like swords and spells? Is it the dragons? Is it the weird monsters? Is it because it replicates things that you've seen before, like Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones? Is it like your favourite book series? Is it like your favourite game series? Is it just like Skyrim? Or, if you kind of step back from all that stuff, is the reason that you like fantasy because it's comforting? It's simple. It doesn't sound simple because there's all sorts of things like mana and spell slots depending on your game or anime or TV series of your choice. But there's magic and there's all sorts of weird concepts. But at the same time, it's very simple. It's just horses and carts and furnaces, chimneys, pans and pots, and the most sort of advanced thing in your world might be a windmill or a cart or a manner of actually shaping iron into steel. So, with that level of simplicity and that level of understandability, history nerds can get on board. Even people that don't know about history probably have a generic or general knowledge of the past and what they couldn't achieve then that we can achieve now, like electricity, phones, telephone networks, that kind of thing. So, with that in mind, it's much more simple. You have less stuff going on, and you can replace it with magic, and that is an important step, I feel. It's simple, it's comfortable because it's simple, but also there's weirdness about it. That weirdness can replace a lot of things. So I wanted to compile words, compost, synonyms, words beginning with com, that I want to go through in terms of fantasy and why there might be a lot of them. Because of course, IPs, genres, business strategy, it's all well and good, but if we look at the game itself, what is the draw of fantasy? Well, if I was to sort of narrow it down, again, simplicity, comfort, and also magic. You might think, well, you know, I usually play a fighter. Maybe, but without magic, fantasy isn't really there. And when I say fantasy, I mean the first thing you think about when you think fantasy, because technically, the likes of sci-fi is fantasy. If you look up what sci-fi is, it's technically fantasy. It is not reality. Therefore, it's fantasy. But speaking of sci-fi, why do people like fantasy, but there's a lot less love for sci-fi? And when I say a lot less love, I don't mean people dislike sci-fi. A lot of people love sci-fi. I mean, come on, it's the most nerdy thing, right? Space travel, astrophysics, Star Trek, Star Wars. Who doesn't love sci-fi? But if you were to ask someone, hey, do you want to play D&D or do you want to play a fantasy game, not a sci-fi game that isn't ones that you're thinking about? You know, do you want to play the Alien RPG? Do you want to play Mothership? I've just named 2 horror movies, not horror games there. So, or do you want to play Traveller? There we go. Do you want to play Traveller as opposed to D&D? Some people might say, yes, that sounds fun. I've heard about Traveller. Okay. Do you want to keep playing Traveller? Do you want to never play D&D again? Do you want to never play a fantasy game again and only play sci-fi? I don't know about that. Now here's a question. Could you cut out sci-fi games forever and just stick to fantasy? I think a lot of people would say yes. So why? Why is there a lot more preference for fantasy than there is for sci-fi? Well, if fantasy is simple and there's magic, sci-fi is the opposite, I feel. I think that's the main thing that drives people away from sci-fi and makes them gravitate towards fantasy, because all these things that you could point out about fantasy, why it's cool, because it's not like our world, because there's creatures in it that are not like the ones that we have on Earth, there is other forms of transport and weird technologies, but if you squint, couldn't a high-tech technology that is indistinguishable from magic just be magic again? Like the Force. It's in a sci-fi setting, but come on, it's space magic. There's all sorts of sort of replacements for magic in sci-fi to make a science fiction fantasy that is very prevalent of a fantasy, very prevalent of a genre too. I mean, look at the likes of Starfinder; it's everywhere. So those two things blend. Alternate forms of travel, teleportation. Those two things could just be fantasy and sci-fi. Going through a portal and going to a different world. How many times have we seen that in the DC and Marvel movies? And that's not magic. There's magic in them, but you know, there's portals and gateways and all sorts of science fiction things too. So why not sci-fi? Well, I think people are intimidated by sci-fi. That's not me saying if you don't like sci-fi, then you're an idiot. But I'm saying I think that sci-fi inherently, in people's expectations, carries a lot of baggage. For example, if I want to get from A to B in a fantasy game, I'm probably not going to be traversing the stars. And if I am, it's probably going to be the likes of Spelljammer or other sort of equivalent for space fantasy, like Starfinder. Except, even in Starfinder, in sci-fi games, how does getting from A to B work? Well, I travel on the planet. What about when you're not on the planet? Well, I get my spaceship. Okay, spaceship, cool. How does a spaceship fly? Well, I point in that direction and it goes. What direction? It's not just flat plane. I'm not saying the world is flat, but I'm saying, you know how that works. If I look at the horizon, it looks flat, but it's not that way in sci-fi. There's up, there's down, there's down. There is no direction in space. It's just a 360-degree sphere. It's a spherical direction. So how do you deal with navigation? Another thing, what if you crash your ship? How quickly will it take you to suffocate in the vacuum of space? How quickly do you die in space? How does pressurization in a vacuum work when it comes to a spaceship? If it's a fake concept like artificial gravity, how does that work when something's turned off? Can it be turned off? Can it even generate? What do you need to generate artificial gravity? Does it need to be a spaceship that is big enough to do so? Does it need to be a ring? Does it need to be some sort of like spit? All these questions about how science works, I feel like is a baggage for people, because in fantasy, it's the world that is simpler than our own, plus magic. Sci-fi is a world that it has everything in our world, and more of it, that we don't know how works, when we probably don't know how all the things in our world work as well. That's a pretty scary concept, right? I mean, you know, you could have a sci-fi setting where things are so high-tech that your characters are just incredibly, like, able to traverse easily, and it's like, but wait a minute, have you heard of a game called Numenera? Because it's starting to sound a lot more like Numenera. If tech becomes so beyond our imagination, it becomes magic again. Nanobots to create fire in your hands? That's magic. Like, it might look like sci-fi if you've seen behind the code, but it's magic. If I conjure fire in my hands and fling it at someone like a firebolt, a devil in D&D might do that, but it's not sci-fi. That's sci-fi, that's magic, but they look the same. So, why not sci-fi? It's the complexity. It's the fact that, well, yeah, there might not be as many IPs out there that do a lot of the heavy lifting, but yeah, it's the fact that sci-fi just isn't simple. I even tried to think about, right, I want to make a sci-fi game. I really do. I love sci-fi. I might even like sci-fi more than fantasy. I like sci-fi a lot. Whenever there's anything that I can sink my teeth into when it comes to a hard sci-fi, or even a soft sci-fi, I absolutely love it. And any IP, I cling onto it and I love it to death. Cyberpunk, sci-fi, I eat that stuff up. But now we have the question of, okay, well, what can we do? Can we make sci-fi simple? Well, I tried, but I think just saying, don't worry about it, is a lot different from making the game so that you don't worry about it. I could put a paragraph saying, don't overthink it, just do it, just whatever you think, don't worry about the science, just play sci-fi. Isn't that fun? Well, maybe, but that's not going to stop everyone. You hand people the Star Wars RPG. Some people are going to love the fact that they're sci-fiing around. However, there's going to be other people that are starting to panic because they now have to think about, okay, I've got all these like buttons and doohickeys that I can do. I've got these different things. My character can do X, Y, and Z. I'm on a spaceship now, flying through the space. Oh. So these things can be intimidating for people. And I mentioned the likes of Mothership, IPs, Alien before. So we have a lot of we have a lot of fantasy, not as much sci-fi. What's another sort of undersold IP or a lot of undersold genre in comparison to the likes of D&D, fantasy? Well, horror. Why isn't there more horror games? Well, I probably don't need to take that wild of a guess here. How many people love horror movies? Quite a lot of people. Does everyone like horror movies? Well, kids probably don't like horror movies. They're probably terrified of horror movies that are really spooky ones and scary ones. So, well, you've lost an audience member there. You're probably not going to have a lot of kids coming to the table, getting the introductory play of D&D replaced with an introductory play of the Alien RPG. So that kind of thing is probably not going to be as expansive to an audience. Okay, Call of Cthulhu. That's a horror game. It's not sci-fi. Well, yeah, cosmic horror. You could go wild with it, but yeah, it's a horror game, and it's really popular. People love the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. It's absolutely massive in Japan, but do people like the horror of that? If you were to take a full net and swipe the entire Call of Cthulhu fan base up, is that because they like horror? Or is it because they like Call of Cthulhu? Is it because they like H.P. Lovecraft? Is it because some of them pretend that they know a lot about H.P. Lovecraft when they don't? These sort of things can be in the audience base, but I think if you were to sit someone down and say, hey, do you want to replace fantasy with horror, only horror? I don't know if people would want to do that. There's all sorts of IPs to shoot for out there, and, well, it's a good question, actually. Why wouldn't people want to go for horror all the time? Compare that to fantasy. Why do people like horror, but they wouldn't want to supplant fantasy with horror? Well, fantasy is quite nice in a lot of ways. You have magic, you have cute owlbears, you have fairy sprites and all sorts of folklore that have funny pictures at the very least, even if they're weird fae from Irish folklore that are very strange and, you know, all sorts of weird folklore things, but, you know, they can be drawn nice, and we have all sorts of IPs, indie makers that make the tiny little dragons and coffee shops. Isn't that all cute? Meanwhile, horror is meant to intimidate you. It's meant to scare you. It's meant to make you uncomfortable. So, the comfort of fantasy versus the uncomfortable nature of horror, it's never going to win. No one's going to be chasing for more and more horror when, if after a long week of work and the horrors of turning on the news these days, do we really want to sit down and go for more horror? For some people, yes. I love that kind of thing, but for a lot of people, no. They just want to be knights and wizards and sit down and have a grand old time, eating pizza, laughing with friends, killing goblins and slaying dragons and saving princesses, or vice versa. But who knows? Just to tag in the likes of horror, I mean, if we take not just horror, but I guess like grim fantasy or grim topics. We have grim fantasy, we have grim dark sci-fi. I mean, look at 40k. 40k is massive. But is it as popular as D&D? I don't know. Well, tabletop role-playing games, definitely not. There is Warhammer role-playing games, and they're really cool, but they're not as big. People play the tabletop wargaming of 40k, and that's massive across the globe, but the tabletop role-playing games for Warhammer, whether it's Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer 40k, even Rogue Trader, that kind of thing, it's not as big as fantasy. And I think the sort of IP for Warhammer is popular, but the IPs that focus on grim and dark, or grim dark if you want to go for that, some people aren't a fan. For example, in my Morkborg video, I talked about the fact that one person reviewed Morkborg and said that it was too dark for their tastes, it made them feel all grim, so they give them a lower score because of that. It's supposed to do that. It's supposed to be dark and horrible. But why don't people like dark and horrible as much? What an interesting question, Alice. I'm glad you asked it, but I know the answer already, because grim and horrible isn't as fun as just nice and comfortable to some people. I happen to think it's fantastic. For example, as I mentioned, I love sci-fi, I love cyberpunk, I love cyborg. It's my favourite of the Borgs, I have to admit, but I also love stuff that is really, really quite painful to watch, like Cyberpunk Edge Runners, which was a fantastic series, excellent IP, loved it to death, but I must admit that a lot of the community and myself were in just emotional tears and wrecks after that was all finished and done, once we watched the final episode. And by the way, CD Projekt Red, I'm bringing it up in this video so you'll never ever see it now, what the hell was that trailer? If you've not seen it, you haven't seen Cyberpunk Edge Runners, don't look it up, watch Edge Runners first and then look at the trailer, but for those that have, spoilers, what a way to open it. Why are you going to remind me like that? Anyway, so IPs that are grim and horrible and sad, while they're excellent as pieces of media, would we like them as much if they were a campaign every single week, getting emotionally destroyed piece by piece, just week after week of sad and heartbreak, sad songs and sitting in the rain, the wrong city, these people, set it all on fire, burning, my life's a ruin, I haven't got health insurance. Anyway, all this stuff can really break you down, especially if your real life is just a stress from Monday to Friday. So getting to Saturday and getting to play a game, do I want a week upon week upon week campaign of grim and horrible? Probably not. But people will buy it, to have it, to enjoy it, to talk about it, to have it and love it. But then fantasy is always going to win out still, because whatever fantasy game it is, people are going to probably play that for sessions upon end, and probably give this other thing a try. The grim fantasy thing, the grim sci-fi thing. Sorry, my lunch has come up there. The grim stuff, they'll give it a try, but fantasy will win the day. To sort of conclude this whole discussion, I've said fantasy is simple, it's comfortable, and that's the strength of it. And it really is the strength. I've also mentioned the likes of magic, and how it makes things very fun, and is it interesting to have all these different creatures, but I didn't really explain the other part of having magic in the game. I said that fantasy is easy because you have to worry about what? The top speed of a cart? Sounds simple, rather than the top speed of a ship going at different miles per hour through a comet. You don't have to worry about that. It's just all simple. But magic changes the entire scope of fantasy in general. Because magic does the thing that no other game from other genres can really do, and that is, it allows the GM and the players to sort of just hand wave. Why does this work? Magic. Why didn't it work? Magic. We can just hand wave. Oh no, magic did it. The gods did it. The eldritch gods did it. Something strange happened. Magic. It just solves all these worries. I don't have to worry about the top speed of the Millennium Falcon. I have to worry about, well, nothing, because why did it work? A spell. Why is this thing floating in the air? Do I need to know the exact magic? Magic solves a lot when it comes to the comfort of fantasy. It makes it so comfortable because not only do I have to worry about less and how things work less with fantasy, because it's sort of old-timey medieval stuff, but then I get to fill the gaps that I don't know, and things that I want to create with magic. Because sci-fi, I need to think about what would work with you're having an adventure on like a satellite or a spaceship or a space shuttle. I need to think about X, Y, and Z, the general space of like an area. Meanwhile, how big's this dungeon? Well, it could be massive. What, it was underneath a city, how did no one know? Magic. A lot can be hand-waved with magic. It can solve a lot of problems. And it makes the creation, the mistakes, and the sort of fun and flavour just be explained away. It's a medium on top of the sort of realistic or simulation aspect of some other games, and turns it into, I can make up whatever I want. Because in fantasy, I've got magic. I've got this force that makes things unpredictable and strange. I can make whatever I want. That's why the creation involved with GMs and players can be so interesting in fantasy, because it can be anything. In sci-fi, I need to worry about X, Y, and Z. In horror, I need to make it more grounded so that it feels more scary, because horror plus fantasy doesn't work. It really does not. It doesn't feel as scary if you can just blast someone away with a spell. But having fantasy and magic, it makes things more comfortable, simple, easy. And that, I think, is a massive, massive contributor why fantasy, the genre, can never be marketed away or marketed to be more popular, because people will always seek out that experience. No one at Wizards of the Coast could talk about fantasy or D&D in general for years, and people will still play it. Because we remember what came before. We remember Lord of the Rings. We remember all these books that we've read that we love. And even if we don't remember them, we want to fill our minds with things that we create. Weird concepts. What if every single country thought, what if there was a lizard with wings? That's happened in the past. Humans love to create, and magic gives it this weird sort of implausible force to just create and not have any boundaries. Not just, here's a piece of paper, create what you want, but here's a game of any kind, and as long as there's magic in it, then I can solve, create, and do pretty much everything. It takes the weight off GMs to have to learn and know all this stuff, and just, it's magic. That, I feel, is why fantasy is kind of unkillable compared to other things. We will love sci-fi, horror, these other genres that we can pick up and play and love and want to play more of, but it's hard to say no to fantasy. Another thing, last thing as well, when it comes to the likes of dark things like Grim Hollow, for example. I love Grim Hollow, I love Grim Fantasy, I love dark stuff in general. Whenever I create and I have the freedom of magic, as I've just explored quite thoroughly there, I always go in a really dark direction for some reason. I'm sure it's not just a me thing, it's probably very popular, but I love to create dark stuff. But when it comes to dark stuff, every human, in horror, in anything, tries to make something comedic happen. That's why the movie The Thing, has a lot of comedic beats in it, because humans, amidst tragedy, amidst fear, try to make light of the situation. Humans like to have a little break and escape to get out of this horrible situation. That's why a long week of bad times and stress, and ending it with a mopping of the brow and playing a fantasy game where things are easy and simple, is great. So to fill that spot with a dark and horrible grim thing every single week, maybe that's something that they chose to leave out of the Grim Hollow sales pitch material, is that, yeah, if you give someone Grim Hollow and make this incredible world, maybe having a GM, a DM, no one in particular, run week after week of a Grim Hollow, a dark fantasy game, it can make you feel like you're in a corner, like you have to be dark and things have to be grim, and you can get burnt out. In the same way that if you had 100% realistic or horrible or sad IPs to work with, you would get ground down and worn out very quickly. You get very quickly burnt out. But would you be as burnt out with fantasy? With nice things, where you can slot darkness in, where you don't have to have darkness all the time. It can be anything, maybe plus a little sprinkle of darkness. I think people would choose fantasy every single time. They choose the sort of niceness and the freedom of fantasy every single time. So, with that being said, I'm going to stop the video now. Fantasy, magic, all these things are simple, they're uncomplicated, and that's why they will always win the day over other sort of things. Whether it's horror, dark stuff, realistic stuff, the freedom of fantasy, get to make up what you want, get to be superheroes, get to be heroes in general, get to be just plebs, but witnessing magic and having the freedom of a medieval fantasy setting. It's just so comforting. It's a comfort food, but I get to play while eating comfort food. So, with that being said, I'm going to cut the video off here. Tell me in the comments about your favourite games and whether you do like games that aren't just fantasy. Do you play in a campaign where it's not just fantasy? What is it? I want to know. And how long have you been playing? How long do you predict that it's going to last? And with that being said, I love you all, and I'll see you next time.